I'm certainly not an expert on Tesla's life or the decisions he made, but I suspect, based on the facts that we have, that he was secreting his really breakthrough inventions that really will constitute sort of the infrastructure, the global infrastructure of the 21st century. I think he was probably in all likelihood hiding his most advanced developments to keep them away from the war industry, because we know he had been exploited in that death ray project. Some have conjectured that the 1907 blast at Tunguska in the former Soviet Union in Siberia was the result of energy that Tesla arced over the North Pole in a death ray experiment. Clearly, Tesla was one of the several Leonardos in the history of not just Western civilization, but the human civilization on Earth. And I think he was a very advanced soul and clearly, literally, an epical genius on the level of a Leonardo da Vinci. And my guess is, it's only a surmise, but my surmise is that he was hiding his most advanced technologies because he didn't want them to be captured by any military of the world and exploited for their war-making potentials. And in fact, unfortunately, that's part of the tragedy of this. In a sense, I feel that I'm a kindred spirit with Tesla, because I'm waging this truth campaign so that Nikola Tesla's technologies can be freed from where they're sequestered in the military-industrial intelligence complex in the United States,
right,
and be used to advantage all of humanity. So I kind of feel this the spiritual linkage to Tesla, because unfortunately it looks like he was hiding his most advanced work that he was undertaking in the last 15 years of his life. And if you look at how frequently he was seen in public feeding his pigeons and so forth, I think he was doing that intentionally to conceal his work. But we know that the U.S. government was aware, different agencies of the U.S. government were aware of the advanced nature of his work, and that he hadn't retired or lost his mind or become involved extensively in raising pigeons, because two different teams were sent there, the FBI team and then the War Department team. So they knew that Tesla was still working on things that they still didn't have access to.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably hiding behind a veneer of as if he had aged and had sort of lost his mind or become addled and was just simply absorbed with his pigeons. He may have very well been absorbed with raising pigeons as pets, just as a diversion, but we know he was engrossed in very profound research and development activities, but that unfortunately these devices were then weaponized, and they've been sequestered at the Los Alamos National Labs since Tesla's death in the mid-40s.
Right. So ultimately, it doesn't really have to do with him, so to speak. A lot of the consequent discoveries that were made, they were just based on what Tesla discovered, and as you say, these technologies have consequently been weaponized and used by the military. Is that right?
Well, yes, some of them have been used. We know that the hologram technology from the chronovisors that Ernetti and Gemelli developed, we have a statement by Captain Ernest Garcia, who was the Army Security Attaché to Project Pegasus, and who was helping me in my research in the early 2010s. He gave me a lot of valuable information. He stated that we used holography to deceive Saddam Hussein's regime that we were invading Baghdad with literally thousands of tanks during the invasion of Baghdad during the Iraq War, after the bombardment there.
Yes.
But no, going back to Tesla, I don't think that Tesla was keeping his leading technologies from humanity. I think he was trying to protect them from the military-industrial complex on behalf of humanity. And unfortunately, he knew what he was doing was the emergent technology of the next 100 years, and yet he had to continue to develop it, but at the same time he had to hide it from them. But they ended up getting it anyway. So I don't think the onus for that can be laid at the feet of Nikola Tesla.
Right.
I think that we can lay that at the feet of the U.S. Department of Defense, essentially usurping Tesla's technologies, and consequently putting us in a situation where we may have to deploy these technologies ultimately on an emergency basis, rather than having them gradually introduced into our global infrastructure. So I think the onus really we can lay at the feet of the military industrial complex in the United States. And I suspect that Tesla was actually trying to protect his devices from the U.S. government, and probably trying to find a way to see if he could have them deployed globally without them being first weaponized. But unfortunately, they were weaponized, and they've been sequestered ever since at Los Alamos.
Hmm.
And that's the true history of U.S. time travel research, is essentially the sequestration of Tesla's cutting-edge technologies, and so that the time-space age was essentially stillborn. And I'm trying to revive it and bring it back to life, so that, for example, we can jump between major metropolitan hubs at different world cities, and then take all those airplanes out of the sky and all the
Yes.
with it all the greenhouse gases that we're emitting just in conventional, commercial airline flights.
And it would be more comfortable than to sit in an airplane for 16 or 20 or whatever, how many hours it is as well. So why not, huh?
Yeah, well, think of London to Sydney. That's a 24-hour flight. Imagine lasting several seconds rather than 24 hours.
Exactly. Another one simply wanted to know if you had foreknowledge about 9/11 or not.
I did, but when I discuss what I had foreknowledge of, people become confused and they think, well, he was a kid on this project, so he brought all these data points forward. He must have been talking about them. He must have been waiting for the individuals that had been identified as future presidents of the United States, for example, to get elected. It really wasn't like that. I mean, if you think of how many people you meet and how many bits of information you process just in one day, it was different than that. I basically had a set of exposures to future information, and it was only after those events happened that I was able to say, oh, I remember hearing about that when I was on Project Pegasus. I wasn't living my life in anticipation that a certain set of political events, for example, were destined to occur. I simply had foreknowledge of them and pretty much forgot them. But then they were revived in my memory as a result of those events then happening. Now, people will say, well, that's a threat to validity. You're just saying something that happened, you knew it was going to happen. Well, unfortunately, that's what happened. I mean, I heard about certain people becoming president. I heard about certain major events. And I saw some data from the future that I did carry forward, but I was only able to correlate it when those events then happened, because, I mean, I didn't even start looking into what happened to me on Project Pegasus until I was 37 and a half years old. So we're talking about, in some cases, well, certainly in the early Pegasus material itself, when I was a kid on the project, we're talking about me reaching back 35 years, now 40 years, to remembering what I did. Now, if you try to think of something that you did on a Tuesday afternoon when you were 7 years old, I mean, please. So I can only remember this stuff because I did such memory work over the last 10 years, trying to map the people, the places, the events, and those scant data points that I recovered when I was on the project of what the future held. Now, among those, the 9/11 event was very conspicuous, and it was conspicuous for two reasons in terms of foreknowledge of the event. The first is that on a social level, when I was sharing meals, for example, in the restaurants in Old Town Albuquerque, with my dad and other people on the project, these would be engineers from the Ralph M. Parsons Company. They would be federal science administrators like Dr. Harold M. Agnew when he was the director. By 1970, he was then the director of the Los Alamos Labs. They might involve somebody from the CIA. I remember we took several meals with Dr. Ivan Browning when he was the director of science and technology at CIA. There might be a consulting engineer from General Electric like Bob Beckwith at the lunch table. There might be a Manhattan Project scientist like Dr. Edward Keller was present at some meals that we took. And also they were attending every once in a while a political person who was destined for a career of substantial magnitude in the United States would also be one of the people who was a guest at the lunch table there when the Project Pegasus engineers, shared meals together. They favored the La Hacienda and La Placida restaurants in Old Town Albuquerque, New Mexico, because at that time those were the oldest and the most renowned restaurants that served Mexican food in the whole state of New Mexico. So those were sort of significant restaurants to take guests, for example. Let's say a consulting engineer from another state was coming through and you just wanted to treat this person to a special lunch in New Mexico. Well, we would drive down from Santa Fe or Los Alamos or wherever we were and share lunch, let's say at the La Hacienda, with that person. So there were many, many meals that I shared with not just my father, but with the project engineers and administrators and guests during